Alright, so I wanted to shoot a video on influential guitar players and share with you my top 5 most influential guitar players. These are the ones that I've aspired to be like, or I've learned the most from, I guess, and really tried to emulate. And then I would love at the end of this if you could leave a comment and share your top 5 list. I think that'll be cool to look through everybody's list. I'll learn something, you'll learn something by looking at other people's lists. So feel free to do that, and you can also leave the reasons behind that. It's always kind of interesting to see who inspires who. Now, just keep in mind, an influential list is different than saying the top 5 greatest guitar players. You know, there's all these greatest lists, and I always kind of hate those because they cause controversy. If I were to tell you the top 5 greatest guitar players, that's just going to upset a lot of people because I'm going to for sure leave off somebody that you think should be on the list. Rolling Stone did that a few years ago. They did their top 100 list, and it was nothing but chaos from what I gather. And it's just some writer at the Rolling Stone, and it's, you know, that person's opinion, and you know, what is that worth anyway? So I started off by writing down this long list of names. I just started brainstorming. I had George Harrison and Mark Knopfler and Warren Haynes and Jerry Garcia and Freddie King and Robert Cray. Just the list went on and on. David Gilmour. I had all these names of guitar players that I've looked up to. And it's sort of like, how do you boil it down? Well, the one thing I noticed, though, was all these names were really popular. You know, these are popular players. This is sort of like, it almost seemed like a generic list. Like everybody's going to have a lot of these same names on their list. So I wanted to rethink it a little bit and then be true to myself and go, who are the guys that I've looked up to and tried to sound like, where I've actually sat down and listened to the nuances and the phrasing and all of those little things that make them them, and I've tried to do that. And there was, that made it a little easier. And also, I took the popularity contest out of it. So I wasn't thinking about, you know, who are the big names. I was just trying to think of who are the influencers. So keep that in mind when you come up with your list. This could be your dad, your uncle, it could be some, you know, local guy that plays in a bar or whatever. It doesn't have to be, you know, legendary status. So here's my list, my top 5. Number 1 being the most influential, and I'm gonna start with number 5. But now I don't sound like all of these players, but these are players that I've tried to sound like, I've studied them, and so all of that. So they've had a huge impact on me for years and years. Not just a sort of quick flash in the pan. I have a lot of those, but these are the ones I've stuck to. So number 5 is Cooder, and he's one of those players that there's parts of his career that I really don't like at all. There's albums that he puts out that I don't like. But then there's certain things that he does that I like so much that they trump everything else. And so he's very inconsistent to me, and probably a lot of you might agree with me on that. You know, he gets into political things and, you know, all of that, which I always hate it when musicians do that. But when I look at Cooder, what he does live, and the soul that he has in his slide playing, and just his approach to the whole thing that's kind of what I want to do. I always wanted to sound like him and be kind of like him. Not all of him, but parts of him. That one album he did back in the 70s called Showtime, man, every song on that is like, I could listen to that album over and over again. It's just incredible. Like his playing on that, he was at the top of his game in that. So that era of Cooder, that's what I'm talking about. So that's number 5 for me. And I'm also trying to learn slide, and I'm still really studying him and trying to get his vibrato and everything. All right, so number 4 on the list might surprise you. He's a local, but he's not one of the big names. It's Guthrie Trapp. So if you don't know Guthrie, you got to look him up. You can go on YouTube and check him out. He's got his own channel where he does guitar lessons. There's a lot of performance videos of him. But Guthrie's one of the best. I mean, he really is, to me, to my ear, in terms of phrasing, he's like this perfect blend of country, jazz, and blues. If you were to put them in a blender, you'd get Guthrie. And in Nashville, guitar players are everywhere. You know, when you go to a guitar store, you hear them. When you're waiting in line for pizza, you hear them. They're just all over the place, and there's a lot of good players. But because of that, it all starts to sound the same in a way. You know, you just hear a lot of good music, and you just sort of accept it. But when I heard Guthrie, he stood out to me in a way that it's been a long time since I had heard a guitar player that jumped off the page like that. And so this was maybe 10 years ago. I was at a local something, I don't even remember what it was, but he was playing with a trio. He wasn't doing any gimmicks or anything. He was just playing very soulful. He's a very fast player. And anyway, he's just one of those guys that I would love to play like. And so every now and then I'll hear a Guthrie lick. I'll be listening to something and I'll slow it down and try and figure it out and figure out where it's coming from. But he fascinates me. He's a great improviser, and he just seems like a cool guy. I don't know Guthrie, but I would like to know him. Anyway, he's number 4. Number 3 is also a local guy that isn't one of the big names, but it's Dave Rawlings. And I saw Dave when he first came to town. I think it was when he first came. This was in like the mid-90s. Dave Rawlings, Gillian Welch, the two of them were playing together, and they were playing always at Station Inn and sort of local, very easy or approachable, people that you can go talk to after the show. He's still like that, but there's just something about the vibe that he puts out that is just absolutely what I'm thinking. Those are the players that they're saying what you want to be able to say, and so to me, Dave Rawlings is that. Whether he's playing his acoustic stuff, which is incredible, or he's playing with his band, playing electric, it's always good. It's always what I want to be able to do. And the thing about Dave Rawlings is his stuff isn't impossible to learn. You can sit down and dissect it. I mean, some of it is very fast, but for the most part, I can listen to it and I go, I should have. Why didn't I think of that? A lot of his stuff is dissonance and those kinds of things, but he does it in very simple to understand ways if you analyze it. So check out Dave Rawlings if you're not familiar with him. He's one of the best. All right, so number 2 on the list. Now we're getting to the big guys. Number 2 is Chet Atkins. He's one of my all-time heroes. He's a genius. I mean, Chet, the other guys are great players and they're really good, but Chet to me is genius at a whole different level. There's not a lot of musicians that to me are just, they're like Einstein, and Chet Atkins is that. I mean, he was a great arranger. He did these chord arrangements that were incredible, and then he would layer melodies on top of that, and he could improvise in that style. I mean, the stuff that Chet was able to do, his knowledge of not just guitar but music in general was pretty amazing. And anytime I see videos of him, I'll go on these YouTube rabbit holes where I'll be watching Chet Atkins for hours, just old clips that I haven't seen before, and I still watch them in amazement. I'll watch them over and over again, and it's not just watching what he does, it's how he does it. It's his grace. That means a lot to me. I mean, actually, with all of these players, there's something about there's a humble part of it that has to be in there, and it makes me appreciate them that much more when they're not real flashy. If Chet was playing with his teeth and behind his back, it wouldn't mean as much somehow. So anyway, just his demeanor is part of it, I guess. So Chet Atkins, definitely number 2. All right, so number 1 on the list, drum roll, Eric Clapton. He's definitely the biggest influence on me. I've been a huge Clapton fan all the way back from when I first started playing, actually. And I saw Clapton, I think I was 16 when or 17, when I saw the Journeyman tour. And they came through Nashville, and that was the first time. That's probably one of the first live shows I'd seen. I hadn't seen a whole lot up to that point, but I just remember being so blown away at how good live music in general sounded, and the fact that he was improvising his leads, and I couldn't believe it. I just left there completely shocked that exists in the world, that people are like that. And so Clapton is one of those guys that is like, part of the reason why so many people like him is because his stuff is approachable. It's not really that difficult. I mean, you can play a Clapton lick or a solo, and you can figure it out. It's not that hard. You can even do it by ear. You don't have to get out tab and everything. And I think that's part of his appeal, is that there's so many people that like what they hear when they hear him play. And his stuff works across all of these different styles. And he's played country, he's done reggae, he's done, obviously straight up blues, from the cradle blues. He's done the rock fusion thing, and it's all rooted in this blues pentatonic thing. He's milked it for his entire career. And so that's appealing to guys like me and people like you to know that we can do that. What he's doing is not impossible. That's part of his charm. And so Eric Clapton is definitely number 1, and not just his playing, his vocal, and the fact that he's humble. It kind of goes back to what I was saying with Chet Atkins. There's something about that attracts me, this sort of humble attitude to the whole thing, and not trying to, be boastful. If you're really good, you don't have to. So that's my top 5 list. And keep in mind that your lists do change. If you were to ask me 2 years ago who my top 5 were, it probably would look different. Even if you were to ask me tomorrow, it might look different. I don't know. But that's part of it. It's always kind of a moving thing. I tried to stick to people that I've been loyal to, though at least, and studied for several years. But anyway, I'd love to hear your lists or read your lists. So leave those in the comments and let me know who your top 5 most influential guitar players are.